Get out of that seat right now. That VIP seat belongs to a real passenger, not someone pretending to be one. The words cracked through the first-class cabin so loudly that every conversation stopped at once. Coffee cups froze halfway to waiting lips. Laptops remained open but forgotten. Even the quiet hum of the boarding process suddenly felt distant beneath the sharp edge of the accusation. 5 minutes remained before Flight 218 from Chicago to New York would close its doors, but time itself seemed to hesitate as I turned towards seat 1A. The woman sitting there never flinched. Danielle Brooks slowly lifted her eyes toward the flight attendant standing over her. She wore a simple charcoal sweater, dark jeans, white sneakers, and carried nothing more than a slim leather tote resting neatly beneath the seat in front of her. There was no designer handbag, no sparkling jewelry, no entourage announcing importance before she ever spoke. To everyone watching, she looked like an ordinary traveler who had somehow wandered into a place she didn't belong. The flight attendant, Rebecca Sloan, folded her arms with the confidence of someone who believed authority never needed evidence. "I said move," she repeated, louder this time. "This seat has been reassigned to one of our priority guests." Danielle looked down at the boarding pass resting calmly in her hand before meeting Rebecca's eyes again. "Could you explain why?" she asked, her voice steady enough to make the growing tension even more uncomfortable. Rebecca didn't answer the question. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder toward the boarding door where a well-dressed white businessman waited impatiently beside the gate agent. Preston Hale adjusted his expensive blazer and smiled as though the outcome had already been decided. "Sir, we'll have you settled in just a moment," Rebecca assured him before turning back toward Danielle. "Ma'am, you're delaying boarding. Stand up now." Danielle remained seated. She didn't cross her arms. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held out her boarding pass. "My ticket says seat 1A. Rebecca barely glanced at it before pushing the paper gently back toward Danielle. "Tickets can be wrong." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "Then perhaps you should scan it." Rebecca's smile disappeared. "I don't need to." A quiet ripple spread across the cabin. Several passengers exchanged uncertain looks. One older couple stopped unpacking their carry-on bags. A college student removed one earbud. Across the aisle, a young flight attendant named Maya Collins looked toward the handheld scanner clipped to her belt, then back toward Danielle's untouched boarding pass. Something about the exchange didn't feel right. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now back to Danielle. Preston finally stepped into the aisle with an impatient sigh. "Is this really necessary?" he muttered. "Some people should know when they're in the wrong place." Rebecca nodded politely toward him before pointing at Danielle again. "You heard the gentleman. We have an important passenger waiting." Danielle's expression never changed. "Important according to whom?" Rebecca answered without hesitation. "According to the airline." Danielle studied Rebecca for another long second before quietly asking the question that caused the nearest passengers to look up from their phones. "Did you check my ticket?" she said softly. "Or did you check my skin first?" The cabin fell into complete silence. No one laughed. No one spoke. Rebecca's jaw tightened for the briefest moment before she reached toward Danielle's boarding pass with a confidence that suggested she believed the next 5 minutes would end exactly the way she wanted. She had no idea those same 5 minutes were about to change every career standing in that cabin. Rebecca Sloan had seen thousands of passengers walk through premium cabins over the years, and she believed she could identify who belonged before a single boarding pass was ever scanned. Expensive watches, tailored suits, recognizable names, confident smiles. Those were the signals she trusted. Danielle Brooks carried none of them. That was exactly the point. Earlier that morning, Danielle had left her chauffeur 2 blocks from O'Hare International Airport and walked the rest of the way alone. She had chosen comfortable clothes instead of executive attire, left every visible symbol of wealth at home, and carried only the essentials. No assistant followed behind her. No corporate security cleared her path. No airport manager knew she was arriving. To every employee inside Terminal 3, she was simply another passenger boarding another flight. Only 3 people inside Meridian Crown Aviation knew Danielle was on Flight 218 that morning. Lauren Mitchell, her executive assistant. Andrew Cole, the company's chief operating officer. and the chairman of the board, who had approved Danielle's request to investigate the airline's growing number of discrimination complaints personally instead of relying on reports prepared by management. Over the previous 6 months, 17 passengers had described remarkably similar experiences. None claimed they had been openly denied service because of race. Instead, they described unexplained seat changes, unnecessary identity checks, suspicious upgrades favoring other travelers, and constant references to company policy that somehow always benefited someone else. Every investigation had reached the same disappointing conclusion: insufficient evidence. Employee discretion. No policy violation found. Danielle had read every report herself. She had also noticed something corporate investigators overlooked. Almost every complaint involved passengers traveling alone, dressed casually, and belonging to minority communities. Patterns rarely announced themselves with loud headlines. They revealed themselves quietly, one decision at a time. That was why she refused any executive privileges during the investigation. If employees recognized the chief executive officer before they revealed their own character, the test would become meaningless. She did not come looking for mistakes. She came looking for truth. Back inside the cabin, Rebecca reached toward Danielle's boarding pass again, but still refused to scan it. Preston Hale remained standing beside seat 1A with increasing impatience, checking his watch every few seconds as though the delay itself were an insult directed toward him personally. Several nearby passengers watched silently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort. Maya Collins continued observing from the galley entrance. During training, every new flight attendant learned one principle before almost everything else: verify first. Assume nothing. Yet Rebecca had skipped the very first step. Maya glanced toward the backup passenger manifest displayed on the secondary service tablet mounted near the beverage station. She hesitated. Rebecca was the senior flight attendant. Challenging her publicly could end a career before it truly began. Still, something inside Maya urged her to look. She quietly activated the screen while everyone focused on Danielle. The passenger list appeared almost instantly. Her eyes moved down the alphabet until they reached seat 1A. Then she stopped breathing for just a second. The name displayed there had not changed. Danielle Brooks. Confirmed. Paid in full. Executive override. Do not reassign. Maya blinked once, convinced she had misread the screen. She checked again. The same warning remained highlighted in bright gold across the top of the reservation. Before she could process what it meant, Rebecca turned sharply toward her and said in a cold, measured voice, "Maya, step away from that tablet immediately." Rebecca's expression hardened the instant she noticed Maya looking at the secondary tablet. "Did you not hear me?" she asked, taking 2 deliberate steps toward the young flight attendant. "That screen is not part of your assignment." Maya immediately lowered her hands. "I was only verifying the passenger manifest," she answered carefully. Rebecca did not even glance at the display. "There is nothing to verify." Her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the kind that discouraged questions before they could become inconvenient. Maya looked once more at the glowing words on the screen before locking it. She could still see them in her mind. Executive override. Do not reassign. She had never seen that designation attached to any reservation before, and she certainly had never seen a senior crew member. Ignore it. Across the aisle, Danielle remained seated with remarkable composure. She watched every movement, every glance, every decision unfolding around her without interrupting anyone. Years earlier, she had learned that when people believed no consequences existed, they often revealed more about themselves than they ever intended. Preston Hale finally sighed loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "How much longer is this going to take?" he complained. "I have a board meeting in Manhattan this afternoon." Rebecca immediately turned back toward him, her professional smile returning as though a switch had been flipped. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Hale. We are resolving the situation now." Then she looked directly at Danielle again. "Ma'am, I am giving you one final opportunity to cooperate voluntarily." Danielle calmly folded her boarding pass and placed it back inside her jacket pocket. "I have cooperated since the moment I boarded this aircraft," she replied. "I presented my ticket. I answered your questions. I asked you to scan the reservation. You declined." Rebecca folded her arms. "Your refusal to relocate is delaying departure." Danielle answered just as quietly. "No, your refusal to verify my seat assignment is delaying departure." Several nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. An older woman seated across the aisle whispered to her husband, "Why does she not just scan the ticket?" He shrugged without answering, but his eyes never left Rebecca. Even Preston shifted uncomfortably for a moment before regaining his confidence. "Policies exist for a reason," he said. "The crew knows what they are doing." Danielle looked toward him with neither anger nor sarcasm. "Policies only protect people when they are actually followed." The sentence lingered in the cabin longer than anyone expected. Maya felt her heartbeat quicken. Every instinct told her Danielle was right. Training manuals existed because assumptions could cost airlines millions of dollars, not only in lawsuits, but in public trust. Yet Rebecca had skipped every verification step they had practiced repeatedly during orientation. Suddenly, another flight attendant, Eric Dalton, entered the first-class cabin after finishing boarding duties near the aircraft door. Rebecca waved him over immediately. "Eric, this passenger is refusing to vacate seat 1 Alpha after being reassigned." Eric glanced briefly toward Danielle, but never asked to see her boarding pass. Instead, he nodded toward Preston. "Sir, your seat is ready." Preston smiled, reached for the overhead compartment above Danielle, and casually placed his expensive leather briefcase inside as though the seat already belonged to him. Danielle watched the bag slide into the compartment above her head without saying a word. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Someone else's property now occupied the space above a seat that was still legally hers. Maya could no longer remain silent. Taking one cautious step forward, she cleared her throat and said, "Rebecca, I think there may be something on the manifest that you should see before we continue." The entire cabin turned toward Maya, but before she could say another word, Rebecca's face changed completely, and in a voice colder than anyone had heard all morning, she replied, "Choose your next sentence very carefully." Maya swallowed once, feeling every pair of eyes in the cabin settle on her. She had been with Meridian Crown Aviation for less than 4 months. She knew exactly how quickly a probationary employee could lose a career by challenging a senior crew member in front of passengers. But she also remembered the first sentence printed across the company's training handbook. "Safety begins with truth." "Rebecca," Maya said carefully, keeping her voice respectful, "the secondary manifest still shows seat 1 Alpha assigned to Danielle Brooks. It also carries an executive override designation and a notice that says the seat cannot be reassigned." The words landed in the cabin with the weight of a dropped suitcase. Rebecca did not look surprised. Instead, her expression became colder. "You are reading the wrong screen," she replied without even asking to see the tablet. "The primary system has already been updated." Maya frowned. "Then the systems should match." Rebecca stepped closer, until only a few feet separated them. "They will after synchronization. You are still in training. I suggest you remember that." Danielle remained silent. She watched Maya with calm eyes, saying nothing that might influence the young flight attendant's decision. The choice had to belong to Maya alone. Around the cabin, passengers sensed something changing. This no longer looked like a misunderstanding over a seat assignment. It looked like two employees disagreeing about facts that should have been simple to verify. A businessman across the aisle quietly lowered his newspaper. A mother traveling with her teenage son reached for her phone, though she never lifted it high enough to record. Everyone seemed to understand they were witnessing something far larger than a delayed boarding process. Eric glanced uneasily between Rebecca and Maya. "Maybe we should just check the system again," he suggested. Rebecca shot him a look sharp enough to end the conversation immediately. "The decision has already been made." Preston Hale crossed his arms impatiently. "Can we please move this along? I paid for premium service." Danielle finally looked toward him. "Did you pay for my seat?" she asked. Preston hesitated for the first time. "I paid for a premium experience." Danielle answered quietly, "Those are not the same thing." Silence settled once again. Maya could feel her pulse racing. She knew what she had seen. The executive override warning had been impossible to miss. Training had also taught her that override designations were never placed on reservations by mistake. They required authorization from the highest operational levels of the airline. Rebecca suddenly turned toward the galley. "Bring me the primary service tablet," she ordered Eric. Within seconds, he returned carrying the larger device used by the lead flight attendant. Rebecca accepted it confidently, entered her credentials, and turned the screen slightly away from the passengers. Her fingers moved quickly across several menus before she nodded with satisfaction. "There," she announced. "Seat 1 Alpha now belongs to Mr. Hale." Maya's eyes widened. Just moments earlier, the reservation had belonged to Danielle. She had seen it herself. She had memorized the screen because something about it felt important. Yet now the primary tablet displayed a different passenger entirely. Danielle noticed Maya's confusion immediately. "Do not doubt your memory," she said gently. "Systems can be changed. Integrity cannot." Maya looked back toward the secondary tablet mounted near the galley. It synchronized independently through a protected server used for backup verification. If the reservation had truly been altered only moments ago, that device might still contain the original log. Rebecca followed Maya's gaze and immediately understood exactly what she was thinking. Without another word, Rebecca turned on her heel and began walking quickly toward the secondary tablet before Maya could reach it. Rebecca reached the secondary tablet just as Maya stepped toward it. Without saying a word, Rebecca tapped the screen, locked the device, and slipped it into the service compartment beneath the beverage counter. The metallic click echoed through the front cabin louder than it should have. Maya stopped where she stood. "Why lock it?" she asked quietly. "If the information matches, there is nothing to hide." Rebecca closed the compartment door and looked directly at her. "Because this discussion is over." Danielle watched every movement with the patience of someone who had seen this moment before, not on an airplane, but throughout her life. She remembered being 19 years old, flying home after earning a scholarship that nobody in her neighborhood thought was possible. A gate agent had questioned whether the first-class boarding pass in her hand belonged to her. 3 white passengers walked through without showing identification. Danielle had been asked twice. She still remembered standing there, wondering what invisible rule everyone else seemed to understand except her. Her mother had squeezed her hand afterward and whispered words that never left her. "Never let someone else's assumptions decide who you are." That memory faded as quickly as it had arrived. Danielle returned her attention to the present. The cabin looked different now. Passengers were no longer watching a disagreement. They were watching choices. Rebecca had chosen not to scan the ticket. She had chosen not to verify the reservation. She had chosen to lock away the one device that might answer every question. Eric shifted uneasily beside the aisle. "Rebecca, maybe we should ask the captain to review this before we continue." She shook her head immediately. "The captain trusts my judgment." Preston glanced at his watch again. "This delay is becoming ridiculous." Danielle looked toward him. The delay began the moment evidence stopped matching. No one answered. The words settled over the cabin like heavy clouds before a storm. A few rows back, a passenger quietly whispered, "She has a point." Another nodded without speaking. Maya felt something change inside her. Fear had brought her this far, but conscience carried more weight now. She took one careful breath. "Rebecca, company policy requires verification whenever there is conflicting reservation data." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Company policy also requires junior crew members to follow instructions from their supervisor." Danielle finally reached into her tote and removed her phone. She unlocked the screen, pressed a single contact, and waited. The call connected almost immediately. "Lauren," Danielle said in the same calm voice she had used since boarding the aircraft, "begin the 5-minute review." There was no panic on the other end. No questions. Only a composed reply. "Understood. Flight Integrity Protocol 7 is now active." Danielle ended the call and placed the phone back beside her without another explanation. Rebecca laughed softly. "Calling your lawyer will not change the seating chart." Danielle met her eyes. "I did not call my lawyer." For the first time that morning, uncertainty crossed Rebecca's face. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came, replaced again by confidence. She gestured toward Eric. "Escort her to another seat so we can close the aircraft door." Eric hesitated. His feet remained planted on the carpet. He looked at Danielle, then at Rebecca, then toward the locked compartment containing the secondary tablet. He did not move. At that exact moment, every service tablet in the front cabin chimed at once, and the screen suddenly displayed the same unexpected message in bold letters. "Flight operations has temporarily locked all passenger seat modifications." Every alert tone inside the premium cabin sounded at exactly the same moment. Rebecca stared at her service tablet as the screen refreshed automatically. The reservation controls she had relied on only seconds earlier were now grayed out beneath a single line of text. Flight operations lock active. Manual seat modifications unavailable. She tapped the screen again. Nothing changed. Eric tried his tablet next. The same message appeared. Preston frowned. What is happening? Rebecca forced a smile that no longer looked convincing. Probably a temporary system issue. Danielle remained seated exactly where she had been from the beginning. She folded her hands together and quietly looked out the window as ground crews continued loading the final luggage containers below. The airplane had not moved an inch, but the balance of power inside the cabin had already begun shifting. Maya noticed something else. Every few seconds, another notification appeared across the top of the service display before disappearing almost immediately. Reservation history archived. Audit mode enabled. Administrative access suspended. She had never seen those messages before, but one thing was obvious. Someone far above the flight crew had entered the system. Rebecca quickly attempted to contact the gate desk through the cabin interphone. The call connected, but before she could finish explaining the situation, the agent interrupted her. Rebecca, flight operations instructed us not to make any passenger changes until further notice. Rebecca blinked. Who authorized that? The request came directly from corporate operations. The line disconnected before another question could be asked. Eric slowly lowered his tablet. Corporate, he whispered. Rebecca ignored him. This has nothing to do with her, she insisted, pointing toward Danielle. Somebody is overreacting to a software problem. Danielle finally looked back toward Rebecca. Software records actions, she said calmly. People create them. Across the aisle, several passengers exchanged quiet glances. The businessman who had been reading earlier closed his laptop completely. The older couple leaned closer together. Even Preston's confidence appeared to fade as he realized this delay was no longer about customer service. Maya took another careful step forward. Rebecca, she said, if corporate operations activated audit mode, they can probably see every seat change that happened today. Rebecca answered almost instantly. Then they will confirm I followed procedure. Danielle's expression never changed. If that is true, she replied, you have nothing to fear. Those words lingered in the silence. Fear was exactly what had begun appearing on Rebecca's face. She tried logging into the reservation system again. Access denied. She attempted a second time using emergency credentials. Access denied. Eric quietly checked his own account. The same result appeared. The captain's voice suddenly came over the cabin interphone requesting Rebecca to call the flight deck immediately. She hurried forward without another word, disappearing behind the cockpit door. Minutes passed. The passengers remained seated in complete silence. Maya looked toward Danielle. Did you know this would happen? Danielle answered with remarkable honesty. I knew the truth would eventually reach the people responsible for protecting it. The cockpit door opened again. Rebecca stepped back into the cabin, looking noticeably different. The confidence that had carried her through the boarding process was gone. Her face had lost its color. Before she could speak, every monitor in the premium cabin chimed once more, and a new message appeared across every screen. Mandatory live call from Chief Operations. All cabin crew report immediately. The cabin became so quiet that the soft ventilation above the seats suddenly sounded louder than the conversations that had vanished only moments before. Rebecca looked at every monitor surrounding her as though they might somehow display a different message if she waited long enough. They did not. The words remained unchanged. Mandatory live call from Chief Operations. All cabin crew report immediately. Eric slowly placed his service tablet onto the jump seat without saying a word. Preston Hale shifted his weight awkwardly beside seat 1 Alpha, no longer looking like a man expecting special treatment. He looked like someone realizing he had walked into a situation he did not understand. Maya stood perfectly still near the galley entrance, her heart racing. She had never witnessed corporate operations interrupt boarding in real time. Whatever had begun as a disagreement over one seat had now reached the highest levels of the airline. Rebecca finally cleared her throat. Remain seated, she told the passengers, although the authority in her voice had noticeably weakened. She stepped toward the interphone and accepted the incoming call. The voice that filled the receiver was calm, direct, and impossible to mistake. Rebecca Sloan placed the call on speaker. Rebecca hesitated for a brief second before pressing the button. Instantly, the entire premium cabin heard the voice of Andrew Cole, Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Crown Aviation. This is Andrew Cole speaking from corporate operations. Before this aircraft departs, we require immediate clarification regarding an unauthorized attempt to reassign seat 1 Alpha. Rebecca forced confidence back into her voice. The reassignment was necessary to accommodate a priority passenger. Andrew answered without emotion. According to our records, no operational necessity existed. Explain why the original passenger was removed. Rebecca glanced toward Danielle before replying. The passenger refused crew instructions. Andrew paused. Did the passenger present a valid boarding pass? Yes. Did anyone verify the reservation before attempting reassignment? Rebecca did not answer immediately. Andrew continued. Did anyone review the executive override attached to that reservation? Silence filled the cabin. Maya looked toward Danielle. Danielle simply waited. Andrew spoke again. Maya Collins, are you present? Maya took a careful step forward. Yes, sir. Please answer truthfully. Did you observe the original reservation before it changed? Maya closed her eyes for 1 second, remembering Rebecca's warning, remembering her training, and remembering the words Danielle had spoken only minutes earlier. Systems can be changed. Integrity cannot. She opened her eyes again. Yes, sir, she said clearly. Seat 1 Alpha was assigned to Danielle Brooks. The reservation displayed an executive override with instructions that the seat was not to be reassigned. No one spoke. Even Preston lowered his eyes. Andrew's voice returned, steady as ever. Thank you, Maya. Your statement matches the protected audit log. The reservation history confirms that an unauthorized modification attempt occurred after boarding began. Rebecca's face lost what little confidence remained. There has to be some mistake. Andrew answered immediately. There was a mistake. It happened when your crew chose assumptions over procedure. Danielle finally stood from seat 1 Alpha for the first time since boarding had begun. She did not raise her voice. She did not look angry. She simply looked around the cabin before meeting Rebecca's eyes. You never removed me because of company policy, she said quietly. You removed me because you decided a well-dressed white passenger looked more believable than a black woman holding the correct ticket. The words settled over the cabin with unmistakable weight. Andrew spoke one final sentence before ending the call. Rebecca, Eric, remain where you are. The chief executive officer will address the cabin personally in just a moment. No one moved after Andrew Cole's final sentence. The premium cabin seemed suspended between two realities. One had existed only minutes earlier, where Rebecca's confidence shaped every decision without question. The other had just arrived, carried not by raised voices, but by verified facts. Danielle Brooks stepped into the aisle with the same calm expression she had worn since boarding began. She did not rush toward the front of the aircraft. She did not demand apologies. She simply stood where every passenger could see her. Good morning, she said. My name is Danielle Brooks. Rebecca lowered her eyes, already sensing what was coming before another word was spoken. Danielle continued. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Crown Aviation. The silence that followed carried more weight than any applause ever could. Preston Hale's face drained of color. His expensive briefcase still rested in the overhead compartment above seat 1 Alpha, a quiet reminder of how easily assumptions had replaced facts. Maya closed her eyes for a brief moment, realizing the executive override had never been a mystery. It had been protection for the very person responsible for protecting the airline itself. Danielle slowly turned toward Rebecca. You never asked who I was. That was not your obligation. You never needed to know my title. Your responsibility was much simpler. Verify the ticket. Follow the policy. Treat every passenger with equal dignity. Rebecca finally found her voice. I believed I was helping an important customer. Danielle nodded once. You did help one. You just chose the wrong one. Several passengers quietly exchanged looks of understanding. The older gentleman across the aisle removed his glasses and shook his head slowly. A young mother whispered to her son, remember this. Always look at what people do, not what they assume. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Charles Whitmore entered the premium cabin after receiving instructions from corporate operations. He looked from Rebecca to Danielle before speaking. Ma'am, I was informed there has been a misunderstanding. Danielle met his eyes. There was a misunderstanding. Then there was a refusal to verify evidence. Those are not the same thing. Charles looked toward Rebecca. Did you scan her boarding pass? Rebecca remained silent. Did you review the override? Again, no answer came. At that exact moment, every crew identification badge issued to Rebecca, Eric, and Charles vibrated once. Their tablets refreshed automatically. Employee access suspended pending executive review. Flight duties revoked. Rebecca stared at her badge as its status indicator changed from green to red. Eric's device logged him out completely. Charles lowered his tablet without saying a word. Andrew Cole's voice returned over the cabin speakers. Rebecca Sloan, Eric Dalton, and Captain Charles Whitmore, effective immediately, you are relieved of operational responsibilities pending final review by the Corporate Ethics and Compliance Board. A replacement crew has already been dispatched to Gate 21. Please remain available for debriefing. Danielle never smiled. There was no satisfaction on her face, only disappointment. This was never about one seat, she said quietly. It was about what happens when people stop checking facts because appearances seem easier to believe. Rebecca looked up with tears forming in her eyes. Can I explain? Danielle answered with complete composure. You already did. Every decision you made explained everything. The system simply recorded it. As airport operations outside the aircraft began positioning a new crew at the boarding door, every passenger realized they had witnessed far more than a customer service dispute. They had watched an entire culture of unchecked assumptions begin to collapse. Then the aircraft door opened once again, and the first member of the replacement crew stepped inside, carrying a sealed document addressed personally to Danielle Brooks. The replacement crew entered the aircraft with quiet professionalism, greeting passengers one by one before taking their positions without unnecessary ceremony. The tension that had filled the premium cabin only minutes earlier slowly gave way to something else. Relief. The sealed envelope was handed to Danielle Brooks with both hands. She opened it, read the single page inside, then folded it neatly before slipping it back into the envelope. There was no dramatic announcement, no celebration. The decision had already been made through the proper process. Andrew Cole's voice came over the cabin speakers one final time. To every passenger aboard Flight 218, thank you for your patience. Corporate Operations has completed its preliminary review. The actions taken by members of the original crew violated company standards regarding passenger verification, professional conduct, and equal treatment. Their employment with Meridian Crown Aviation has been terminated effective immediately. A full review of previous customer complaints has also been authorized. Quiet murmurs spread through the cabin. Several passengers nodded to one another. The older gentleman who had watched the entire incident from across the aisle smiled gently before saying, "Justice does not always arrive loudly." Danielle looked toward Maya Collins, who still stood near the galley, uncertain whether she should remain where she was. "Maya," Danielle said warmly, "would you please join me for a moment?" Maya walked forward, her hands trembling slightly. Danielle smiled for the first time that morning. You protected the truth when it would have been easier to protect yourself. Airlines can teach procedures. Character cannot be taught so easily. Maya lowered her eyes. I was scared. Danielle nodded. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing honesty anyway. She then turned toward the passengers surrounding seat 1 Alpha. Every one of you purchased more than transportation today. You purchased the promise that you would be treated with fairness and respect. That promise cannot depend on the color of your skin, the clothes you wear, or whether someone thinks you look successful. Preston Hale slowly stepped forward. The confidence that had defined him during boarding was gone. Ms. Brooks, he said quietly, I should have spoken up sooner. I accepted something that was never mine. Danielle looked at him without anger. The seat was only the symptom. The real problem was how quickly everyone accepted that I must have been the one who did not belong. Preston nodded silently and removed his briefcase from the overhead compartment above seat 1 Alpha before returning it to his own assigned seat. The simple gesture seemed to lift a weight from the entire cabin. Danielle finally took her place in seat 1 Alpha, not because she needed to prove ownership, but because it had always been hers. Before the aircraft door closed, she gave one final instruction to Andrew through her phone. Contact every passenger who filed one of those 17 complaints. Tell them we are reopening each investigation. No case will remain closed simply because someone ignored the evidence. Already in progress, Andrew replied. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the morning sunlight stretched across the cabin, illuminating faces that looked very different from when boarding had begun. Some reflected relief. Others reflected reflection. A few reflected regret. Danielle rested her hands calmly in her lap and looked out the window as the runway came into view. She had never raised her voice. She had never demanded special treatment. She had simply insisted that the rules apply equally to everyone. That morning, one seat remained exactly where it had always been. What truly changed was an entire system that had mistaken appearance for truth. And long after Flight 218 disappeared into the clouds above America, the lesson remained firmly on the ground where everyone could see it. Real leadership is not measured by the power to punish. It is measured by the courage to raise the standard so that no one else has to endure the same injustice again.